I still love this hat. Hey everybody, Jarek here. Now before you start recommending a bunch of third-person shooters, know that this one game is an exception. I don't plan on covering any third-person shooters moving forward, but I wanted to cover Dark Sector due to its interesting history and connection to Warframe. Also, I played this game when it first came out, so I figured I might as well revisit it. Dark Sector is a third-person shooter that was released back in 2008 for the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and then eventually PC a year later. I first played this game on the Xbox 360, which runs about as well as you would expect for a 360. 720p, generally 30 FPS, occasionally doesn't match it, but for a console game it was actually perfectly fine, and ran better than most others. But this time around I figured I would play it on PC. If only I had known how bad the PC version was. Now, spare me your hate. People always get angry at the comments when I talk about the PC version for so long, so you can just skip forward if you're not interested. I'm not sure why people get angry about this. The PC player base is not that small, so you can't just ignore that player base entirely because your version's fine. I mean, for the most part, the PC version runs. It doesn't crash when you launch it. I think I had it crash maybe once or twice the whole time I was playing it, so I mean, it's somewhat stable in that regard. The problem is everything else. For starters, there's like no visual options at all. You really can't change anything. The only thing you can change is your resolution. Secondly, they somehow managed to reverse the HUD settings for 4.3 and 16.9. So this means that no matter what resolution you choose, the HUD is going to look messed up unless you fix it in an ini file. You can't change your FOV on your own, which is not really that big of a deal. You can just put something in an ini file and then raise it. I put mine to 90 and it felt fine. It didn't seem to break the game at all. But by far the biggest issue here is that if you have a resolution above 2048 pixels, the game won't work. There's no patches, official or not, to fix this either. If you have a resolution above 2048, you can't play the game at your resolution. For example, my resolution is 2560 by 1440. I can't play the game at 1440. Instead, I was forced to play at 1920 by 1080, which messes everything up. How do you even fuck up that bad? Something as basic as changing your resolution doesn't work. So we're off to a great start. Dark Sector is set in a fictional Eastern European country bordering the Soviet Union called Lazria. Near the end of the war, the Lazrians discovered an American submarine off the coast. When they opened it, a mysterious infection broke loose. This infection mutates its victims and gives them frightening abilities. You play as Hayden Tenno, a CIA agent. He's supported by a Russian scientist by the name of Yargo. The main antagonist, Robert Mesner, is an ex-CIA agent who wants to spread this disease everywhere. That's sort of his utopia. I guess he wants to control all the infected and take over the world that way. It's never really entirely made clear, but his goal is that he wants to spread the infection. The secondary antagonist is a character known as Nadia. Or Nadia? I don't actually remember, and I just played this game a few days ago. This is pretty much all the information you're given. The game does that thing where they introduce new characters and just kind of expect you to run along with the fact that they exist and that your main character already knows them, but they've never been introduced to you, so they're just suddenly thrown at you and you're expected to know them. How would I know them? There's a lot of backstory to this game that you will never get unless you read the Wikipedia page. But what I told you is all I gathered from playing this game. The names mean as much to you as they do to me. Yeah, the story falls flat on its face. I don't know who these characters are, I don't know their actual connection to Hayden's past, I don't know the whole importance of what's happening. All I know is that, oh no, there's an infection, we need to stop the infection, oh no, I'm infected, now I'm murdering people. The story only exists to push the game forward, which would be fine if the game itself was actually fun. Before I rip this game apart, I will say some good stuff about it. For 2008, it doesn't look half bad. In fact, it looks slightly above average. It's not exactly Crysis, which came out the year before, and it's not Far Cry 2, which came out the same year, but it's still definitely above average. That said, it's one of those games that thinks that the color spectrum only involves the colors brown and gray, which gets really dull to look at. Like, sure, it has some nice stuff like the rain and water effects, but everything is so brown and it just looks really dull. This was a trend that was happening at that time. I mean, Gears of War 1 did it, Far Cry 2 did it, and that came out the same year. Big brown filter on everything. But even Far Cry 2 had more color than this game. Anyway, my point still stands. It may be rather brown, but graphically it's still competent. Gameplay-wise, it has a lot of promise. At its core, it's a cover shooter, but you have one very important gimmick: the glaive. Early on in the game you get infected, but this only really seems to give you powers and doesn't seem to harm you. Like, there's not really any downside to being infected. This infection makes you grow a glaive out of your right hand. This glaive can be used in many different ways. It can simply be thrown to cut off limbs and heads and whatnot, but by default it won't be that powerful, oddly enough. You'll eventually be able to charge it up to make it more powerful, which will one-shot most enemies in the game. You'll be able to throw it and then control it manually, which if you played on PS3 you would have had to use the 6-axis for this, which I would have hated. I hate gimmicky tricky controls, I'm sorry. If you throw the glaive into fire, ice, or electricity, you can charge it with that element and then throw it at enemies. And in general, it's just a badass idea. I mean, look at this. How do you take something so cool and fuck it up so badly? Judging by the comments I got when I announced that I was streaming Dark Sector, this game seems to have a cult following. I can only assume they love the game based off its premise alone, because no one can like this game off of the gameplay. This game was born straight out of all the Gears of War clones that came out in the late 2000s. For a while, everyone wanted to be Gears of War, and this is no different. The biggest problem is just that it does nothing anywhere near as good as Gears of War did. Let's start with the controls. They're stiff and clumsy as hell. For a cover shooter, this is awful because you want going from cover to cover to be natural, but it's not in this game. Sprinting, rolling, and taking cover are all bound to one button. To make things worse, it's really not apparent what you're going to do when you're on cover. I know Gears of War has a similar problem, but it's generally pretty obvious what will happen when you press a button when you're behind cover. You are able to go from one cover to the next by pressing a button, but at the same time you might just yeet yourself out into the open by rolling in front of enemies. More often than not, this is what's going to happen. It's also really ambiguous how far away from cover you need to be to latch onto it. Most of the time I try to take cover and I just roll into the cover instead of taking cover like I wanted. To make things worse, when you are on cover, you can't blind fire. Blind firing would have been extremely useful for the glaive, just being able to throw it over cover. But that also means that if you take cover and then do 180 and look behind you, the direction that you're exposed, you can't shoot. In order to shoot that direction, you have to aim, which will make you stand up and expose yourself from all sides. I don't need to explain why this is absolutely fucking awful, but it gets worse. The most useful attack you have with the glaive requires you to charge it for a few seconds before throwing it, which will make it stronger. Since this game is based on regenerating health, and since every enemy does way more damage to you than they should, the result is that you pop up, kill one enemy with the glaive, sit behind cover waiting for your health to come back, pop up, rinse and repeat. To make things even worse than that, 50 more enemies than needed spawn in every damn area, and you can't continue until you kill all of them. But if you think the tedium stops there, no, it gets worse than that. You might have noticed that there are guns in this game. Unfortunately, you can't use them. As soon as you get infected, which happens right at the beginning of the game, you can't use any weapons you pick up. The weapons have chips on them that detect that you're infected and will blow up within a short period of time. In order to use weapons of your own, you have to visit a black market and purchase them. I vividly remember back in the day not knowing this is a thing until halfway through the game because it never explains this to you. It will very briefly say, hey, there's a black market, you should go to it, but it never points you towards one, it just kind of pops up, tells you, and goes away. But I knew that this time around, so it shouldn't be as big of a problem. But it still was. The problem is that this game doesn't give you anywhere near as much currency as you need. There's about 6 weapons in this game. Do you know how many I used through my playthrough? 2. 2! I used only 2! I did not have enough money to buy any of the weapons that I wanted. To make that even more of a problem, the weapons are way more useful to use than the glaive. Your whole selling point of the game is useless to generic third-person shooter gameplay. And if it was that simple, I would have loved it, but unfortunately the game doesn't give you anywhere near as much ammo as you would like, and you can't buy more at the black market, so you're going to have to use the glaive most of the time. God, I wish I could have just shot everything and moved on. It would have made the game be so much shorter. This game really drags on. You spend most of it sitting there waiting for your health to come back due to how much damage enemies do to you, and no, you can't change the difficulty. You walk into an area, enemies will spawn for much longer than they need to, and you'd think that you should just run by them because you're sick of this and you just want to keep going, but you can't, because the exit door is closed till you kill all the enemies, and typically that door opens with more enemies pouring out of it. This game has major padding problems. Combat lasts way more than it should, and the core combat loop itself isn't fun. To make things even worse, this game has the worst case of artificial difficulty I've seen in a long time. I got real sick of just randomly dying with seemingly no explanation. Or maybe the enemies would just cheap shot you. For example, these shield fucks. You'll be behind cover with a bunch of enemies shooting at you with a shield enemy slowly approaching you. You may think it's not that big of a deal. The problem is those shield enemies kill you in one hit. There's only 2 real ways to get rid of the shield enemies. A, throw a grenade behind their feet, not always an option because you don't get that many grenades, or B, charge the glaive and knock the shield up so you can shoot them. The problem is they don't drop their shield when that happens, they only knock it out of the way briefly, and they themselves have a lot of health. It's also a problem when you have a bunch of other people shooting at you, so you can't really pop up to charge that glaive without getting lit up by everyone else. So you have an enemy with a bunch of health, holding a shield that will kill you in one hit while everyone else is shooting at you. You can see what I mean by artificial difficulty. Or maybe the game will just kill you in ways that you couldn't have prevented.
Oh no, why'd you grab me now? God damn it. Oh, that was some bullshit. Just throw me into a quick time event so a train can run me over. Nice. I'm waiting. I'm so excited. I'm sorry? Let's see, hold up. Look at that. I'm being shot through the wall. Oh my god, ouch. What? How did I get killed through the wall? What? Why did that instantly kill me? Yeah, you gotta do the 6-axis stuff for the controlling it. Cover is bullshit in this game. It doesn't do anything for you. Why does that instant kill? What?
And please don't be that guy. There's always that guy in the comments that comes along and says, oh, this game's not hard, you just suck at the game. First of all, that's not a valid response to actual criticism of a game, nor does that make a conversation go anywhere. You're just throwing insults like a jackass. Secondly, when someone complains about artificial difficulty in a game, they're not saying the game is too hard, they're saying the game isn't fun. I can get my ass kicked by a game and love that game. But if it feels like I'm not dying fairly, like if it feels like I couldn't have avoided my deaths, I'm going to hate that game and not find it fun, which is the situation I get in with this game. The last thing I want to talk about in this game are the bosses, because my god, they are boring. The bosses in this game will generally have one pattern and do that pattern over and over and over again with way too much health before they finally eventually die. Take this boss in this church. Cool idea, cool setting, the boss looks interesting, but it just charges at you, you dive out of the way, you charge your glaive of fire, and then you light him on fire. For 10 minutes. 10 minutes may not seem like a long time, but factor in it only takes about 15 seconds to roll out of the way and then light them on fire, and you're going to be doing that same thing for the next 10 minutes? Yeah, this dragged on for way too long. I paused the game many times as I was streaming because I didn't know if I was even doing the right thing. I was getting a reaction by the boss being lit on fire momentarily, but I didn't know if there was an extra step I could have done, but no, it was just this, over and over again. There was one good boss I can bring up. You're trapped in an area with ankle-high water with an invisible boss. You can't see the boss, but you can see its footprints in the water. This is a cool idea, and many other games have done it before. The way to beat this boss is to freeze your glaive, and then freeze the water around its feet to lock him in place. This is a cool idea. It's an alternate way to defeat a boss, and it feels satisfying once you figure it out. It's one of the flashes of brilliance to show what this game could have been instead of what it ended up being. If the whole game was like this, and if the controls didn't feel like a mess, I would have loved this game. Instead, every hour of this game I played felt like 3. By contrast, when I beat Republic Commando, it felt like the game was way too short. But then I look back at my playtime and it was 7 hours, average length for a shooter. The game was so fun, I didn't realize the time that had passed. Dark Sector was so miserable, tedious, boring, and repetitive that it felt so much longer than it should have been. It doesn't help that the game was clearly padding its own time. Do you know that feeling when you wake up in the morning and you're laying in bed and you're just thinking the whole time, God damn it, I really don't want to go to work, and you're just angry at everything? That was me playing this game. That's exactly how I felt. No way in hell would I have beaten this game if I didn't plan to make a video of it. This game mentally drains you. It's just fucking miserable. The last time I had this little fun playing a game was probably Exodus from the Earth or Chaser. And since I know a bunch of people are now going to be asking me to cover Warframe, I just will quickly say, no, I don't intend on doing that. Warframe actually really bores me. I'm not an RPG or an MMO person. I don't like grinding. There's systems upon systems that they don't explain to you. Everything you do is just to have a better number next to your weapon or your Warframe. I just find it so boring. I'm sure I have just triggered a bunch of people, but you have to understand that I'm more of a shooter person. I'm someone that enjoys playing Call of Duty multiplayer in 2020. I just want a raw shooter, not an RPG. I actually would have preferred if they ended up making a Dark Sector 2, but just didn't fuck it up like they did the first game. But that really begs the question, what happened? How did Dark Sector end up this way? Well, Dark Sector was originally proposed to be a follow-up to Digital Extreme's previous game, Unreal Tournament. Yes, they worked on Unreal Tournament. This was proposed back in 2000, but that was scrapped and we didn't hear anything of it for another 4 years. During this time, the game got a massive change in focus. The original design was going to be a multiplayer arena-style first-person shooter in space. It was intended to be a very sci-fi game. This eventually changed to what we ended up getting in Dark Sector. The developers cited a shift in focus by other gaming companies and publishers for a reason being to change to a more modern setting, reducing its sci-fi elements, adding that they wanted to achieve the realism fans would enjoy. Effectively, what this means is that the publisher said, Gears of War is really popular, make that. It's not really a wonder that Dark Sector ended up as bad as it is, and Warframe ended up as interesting and different and unique as it is. Even if I don't care for Warframe myself, I can still say it's a good game, it's just not made for me. With Dark Sector, I can't say it's a good game for anyone. And that's really all I have to say about Dark Sector. It's not a good game, and the review that I agreed with the most with Dark Sector was, interestingly enough, X-Play. I miss X-Play. Hey, if you like this video, then consider subscribing to this channel. Something like 70% of people aren't subscribed to this channel but watch, and I'm trying to reach 300k, so if you could subscribe and then click that bell, that would be really helpful to me. And again, a huge thanks to everyone that joined me on Twitch. This game was killing me as I was playing it. If you want to join me on Twitch in the future, my Twitch is twitch.tv/JerrickForGamingDragon. People that subscribe on Twitch get to see my videos one day ahead of time. Same thing for my patrons over on patreon.com/JerrickFor. Thank all of you guys for watching, and I will see you next video.